Hi, this is Michael Ostrolenk, and I'm speaking with Hadley Heath, Senior Policy Analyst for the Independent Women's Forum. Good morning, Hadley.
Good morning. How are you?
Not bad. Yourself?
I'm good.
Good. Tell us a little bit about the Independent Women's Forum and in general, and more specifically, your efforts against Obamacare.
Sure. Independent Women's Forum is a 501c3 nonprofit, nonpartisan group in Washington, D.C., and we focus on public policy. We focus specifically on public policy from the angle of American women and their families, how big government can actually be more harmful than it is beneficial to women, and how economic freedom is truly the thing that empowers women and their families to participate more in the marketplace and to live lives that are more free and more prosperous.
Fantastic. Sounds like a great organization. Where can we learn more about it?
At IWF.org.
Cool. And you doing some work against Obamacare?
Sure.
Tell us about that.
Sure. Well, there are a lot of policy issues that IWF works on. Specifically, I've spent the past year or so with the organization focusing on healthcare policy, and we really truly see the Affordable Care Act as one of the most destructive pieces of legislation that has come out of Washington over the past several years, maybe decades, in terms of health policy. It's huge. It's about 3,000 pages. It changes a lot of things about our healthcare system. It inserts a lot more government bureaucracy. And I do say more because even before Obamacare, as it's called, government was spending about half of all the healthcare dollars that are spent in our country. So we really didn't have a free market in healthcare to start with, but we think that Obamacare is going to make the situation so much worse, so much more complex, and it's going to really batter our healthcare industry with more regulations, more red tape, and discourage the medical innovation that's so important and that's kept America on the front lines of healthcare.
Now, we're in the middle of August recess, which is good for the Republic that Congress is gone. And you all are specifically working on a project related to the August recess?
Yes,
Can you
exactly.
speak to that?
We produced this ObamaCare August Recess guide, which is actually a set of 5 handouts, and each one of them deals with a different aspect of Obamacare. Because the law is 3,000 pages, it's difficult to summarize in only 5, but essentially we wanted to study how Obamacare would add to the national debt, how it would change health care and health insurance for families, small businesses, employers, taxpayers, and also how it would affect Medicare. There's a new board that's been created to ration care in Medicare. And furthermore, there are constitutional questions at play in Obamacare. So we wanted to cover all of those topics and also include a flyer about how folks can become more involved in the movement for repeal after they read some of the information that we're providing them with, and that so many other useful groups are providing the information to fight back against this. I think Americans, consistently have said, we don't want this law, we don't like this law, even from the beginning. And it's really been insulting, I think, to our democracy and to the way that citizens should have a voice in government to say, from Washington, we don't care what you think. We're going to proceed with this law. We're going to proceed with this government takeover of healthcare. So after people get their hands on information like this, I'm sure that a part of them at least will really want to take action. And so we've included one flyer about how you can get involved in the movement for repeal. So
2 questions. Can you briefly go through a couple of the points you mentioned?
Sure.
And then obviously, how do people follow up?
Okay, great. And I also want to make the point that this ObamaCare August Recess guide is from our sister organization, Independent Women's Voice. And while the two of us have very similar policy stances, Independent Women's Voice is a 501c4, and we're the group that encourages people to take action. So a couple of the points that we touch on are specifically in terms of the national debt. We wanted to explain that we do have a national debt crisis, and that's common knowledge. But the CBO score of Obamacare originally said that this was going to be a deficit-neutral law, that it wasn't going to add anything to our country's deficits and to our debts into the future, but that's simply not true. It was never true. CBO is very limited on what they can examine and how they can produce the results that they do, and there's much more to the story than the CBO score. So we covered some other estimates of the cost of Obamacare, and we talk about how this will be a burden not just for families today and not just in terms of healthcare, but will continue to be a burden for years and years. I mean, originally, when Medicare started, and in 1967, the costs were predicted to be $12 billion in 1990, but in reality, in 1990, Medicare cost our country $110 billion. That's like underestimating the cost by a variable of 10 times. So I totally expect that Obamacare and many other economists and public policy gurus out there have made estimates that say that the CBO score, it just doesn't encompass all the information that's out there. And we see over and over again headlines in the news that say, oh, we were wrong about this, we underestimated that, we have to revise the cost of this law up over and over again. And the major reforms in the law haven't even taken place yet. So we're looking at a very expensive new government set of subsidies and an arrangement in our healthcare system that's going to cost us not just in terms of tax dollars, but in our own personal healthcare spending, we're going to see costs go up. That's another topic that we cover. Another important one that I think is very relevant to the conversation right now is this flyer on does Obamacare violate my constitutional rights? And so far, Obamacare hasn't really changed anything about the structure of our healthcare system. A few mandates are in place about people with pre-existing conditions and people who are under 26 years old. There are some changes in the healthcare industry specifically. But in 2014, everyone in the United States, just about everyone, will be required to carry health insurance, and not just any health insurance, but the health insurance that the government mandates is okay, that has the minimum essential coverage requirements. And so we talk about that in this flyer, and we discuss how this kind of mandate from government is brand new. We've never seen the government order every citizen without any prerequisite activity to purchase a good or service in the private market. That's unheard of. And simply the fact that Congress has never used this power before, I think, speaks to its unconstitutionality. If Congress had had this power for the past 200 years, you think that they would have tried to use it specifically, during some very tough times in our past, like the Great Depression, or during some world wars. You would think that if the government could mandate what people buy, they would have done that, but they didn't because they knew that it was outside of the reach of Congress's powers.
Where can we find out more information that you're talking about, referring to? Sure.
Well, the Independent Women's Voice website is iwvoice.org, but we have several healthcare projects going on, and an important one is our healthcare hub, which is savingourhealthcare.org. It's the word savingourhealthcare.org. And we have links to these PDF documents that you can download and make copies of. I think they're really helpful for grassroots organizations. And like I said, it's a recess guide. So our goal is to put this information and these suggested questions for members of Congress into the hands of people who are attending town hall meetings or meeting with their members of Congress while those members are at home, and they can send them back to Washington, understanding better the concerns that citizens have. Citizens are empowered when they have the right information, and the information about this law is so difficult to break down because it is so complex. It has so many working parts. 3,000 pages. It's a lot of reading for citizens who work in the private sector and have their own businesses and have their own families to tend to. So that's one thing that we hope that we can do at IWF and IWV is break down these complex laws and public policy questions into terms that American families can understand and relate to, and that they can be empowered by that kind of information. So savingourhealthcare.org, iwvoice.org, and finally, Independent Women's Voice has a healthcare website that's solely dedicated to the lawsuits, the constitutional questions, and that is healthcarelawsuits.org.
Great. Well, this is Michael Ostrolenk, and I was speaking with Hadley Heath, Senior Policy Analyst for the Independent Women's Forum. Thanks, Hadley.
Thanks for having me.